Nia stepped off the curb, her suitcase rolling behind her as she approached the grand entrance of the Luxoria Hotel, the city's crown jewel of elegance. The golden facade gleamed under the midday sun, reflecting an image of prestige and exclusivity. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses milled about, and a doorman, clad in a deep navy uniform adorned with polished gold buttons, greeted each arrival with a courteous nod. For Nia, it was more than just a hotel, it was a symbol of achievement, a milestone in her journey. She straightened her shoulders and took a deep breath, determined not to let her nerves show. Tonight's event was one she'd been looking forward to for months. As a recent graduate and recipient of a prestigious scholarship, this gala was a celebration of hard work, dedication, and dreams coming to fruition. It was her moment to shine, but as she walked through the glass doors, the reality of where she was hit her harder than expected. The lobby was a world of its own, opulent yet restrained, with soaring ceilings, chandeliers that sparkled like constellations, and a marble floor so pristine it felt almost sacrilegious to walk on it. Behind the sleek reception desk stood Margot, a middle-aged woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a sharp, scrutinizing gaze that seemed to size up everyone who passed by. Her lips curled into a practiced smile as she attended to a couple before Nia, but as soon as her eyes flicked toward the young woman approaching, the smile faltered. Nia walked confidently to the desk, placing her reservation details on the counter. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "I have a reservation under Nia Collins." Margot's eyes darted to the paper, then to Nia, and back again. Her lips pursed as she picked up the sheet. "Collins, you said?" she asked, the skepticism in her tone sharp enough to slice through the polished air of the lobby. "Yes, that's right. I'm here for the gala tonight," Nia replied, keeping her tone polite despite the receptionist's odd demeanor. Margot flipped through her computer screen, her manicured nails clacking against the keyboard. She murmured, dragging the sound out as if it carried some hidden weight. After a moment, she looked up with an arched brow. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins, but I don't see your name on the guest list." Nia frowned, feeling the first flicker of unease. "That's strange. I confirmed my reservation 2 weeks ago, and I have the email here if you'd like to see it." Without even glancing at Nia's phone, Margot waved a dismissive hand. "That won't be necessary. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." The words hung in the air, heavy with condescension. Nia's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Perhaps you could check again? I was personally invited by the scholarship committee, and I know they worked with the hotel to arrange accommodations." Margot sighed as though the request was a monumental inconvenience. She tapped a few more keys, her expression tightening with every second. The line behind Nia was growing, and the soft murmurs of impatient guests only added to the tension. After what felt like an eternity, Margot looked up again, her gaze colder now. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins," she said, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "But I don't see your name here. And frankly, I find it hard to believe that someone like you would be part of tonight's event." The words hit Nia like a slap. Her heart sank as the humiliation set in, amplified by the curious stares of those around her. "Someone like me?" she echoed, her voice steady but laced with a sharp edge. Margot leaned in slightly, her smile returning but with none of the warmth. "You know what I mean, dear. This is a very exclusive event. Perhaps you're mistaken about where you belong." Nia's grip tightened on her suitcase handle, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her, the judgment, the whispers. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such thinly veiled prejudice, but it didn't make it any easier to stomach. "Excuse me," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I'd like to speak to your manager." Margot chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. "The manager is quite busy at the moment. I doubt they'll have time for something like this." "Something like what, exactly?" The words came from a voice behind Nia, deep and measured. She turned to see a young man in a staff uniform, Luis, his name tag read. He had been arranging luggage carts but had clearly overheard the exchange. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, sympathy, perhaps, or quiet frustration. Luis, Margot said sharply, her tone tinged with annoyance. This is none of your concern. With all due respect, he replied, stepping closer, a guest being treated fairly is everyone's concern. The tension in the lobby was palpable now, the once bustling crowd reduced to hushed spectators. Nia's eyes met Luis's, and for the first time since walking into the hotel, she felt a glimmer of hope. I'll get the manager for you, Miss Collins, Luis said, ignoring Margot's glare. Please wait here. As Luis disappeared into the back, Margot crossed her arms, her disdain evident. You know, she said, leaning in once more, if you'd just been honest from the start, none of this would be necessary. Nia blinked, caught off guard. Honest? What are you talking about? People try to sneak into events like this all the time, Margot said with a smirk. It's not uncommon, especially for those looking for opportunities. The insinuation made Nia's stomach churn. Before she could respond, Luis returned with a tall man in a sharp suit. His presence commanded attention, and Margot's smug demeanor shifted slightly, though she quickly recovered. This is Mr. Reynolds, Luis said. He's the manager on duty. Reynolds looked between Nia and Margot, his expression neutral but attentive. What seems to be the problem here? Before Nia could explain, Margot jumped in. This young lady claims she has a reservation for tonight's gala, but I've checked thoroughly, and her name is not on the list. Nia opened her mouth to speak, but Reynolds held up a hand. Miss Collins, may I see your confirmation email? Grateful for the opportunity to present her case, Nia handed him her phone. He reviewed the email, his brow furrowing slightly. This appears to be in order, he said, glancing at Margot. I'll verify it with the committee myself. Margot's face reddened, but she said nothing. As Reynolds stepped away to make a call, Margot turned to Nia, her voice low and venomous. Don't think this changes anything. You'll still have to prove you belong here. Nia didn't respond. Instead, she stood tall, refusing to let Margot's words diminish her. She didn't know what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain, she wasn't leaving until she got the respect she deserved. Little did she know, the unfolding events were about to take a turn no one could have anticipated. Reynolds returned after a few tense moments, his expression unreadable as he approached. Ms. Collins, he began, addressing Nia directly, I've spoken with the scholarship committee, and your reservation is confirmed. I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience caused. The relief that swept over Nia was immediate but short-lived, quickly replaced by the simmering anger she had been holding back. She glanced at Margot, who stood stiffly behind the desk, her lips pressed into a thin line. The older woman's expression gave nothing away, but Nia could sense the tension radiating from her. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, Nia replied, her voice measured. But this isn't just about inconvenience. The way I've been treated here, she paused, glancing around the room, aware of the crowd that had gathered, their curious stares cutting into her like knives. It's unacceptable. Reynolds nodded, his brow furrowed. I understand, and I'll ensure this matter is addressed appropriately. Before Nia could say more, Margot interjected, her tone sharp and defensive. I was simply following protocol, Mr. Reynolds. There are strict guidelines for verifying guest information, and I was only doing my job. Your job doesn't include making baseless assumptions or humiliating guests, Reynolds said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with situations like this before. Nia felt a flicker of vindication, but the moment was far from satisfying. The damage had already been done. Even as Reynolds escorted her to a private lounge to await her room key, she couldn't shake the weight of what had just transpired. The lounge was luxurious, with plush seating and soft ambient music, but it felt hollow to Nia. She sank into one of the armchairs, her mind racing. She thought about her father, Elliot, who had always taught her to stand tall in the face of adversity. He had faced his own battles with discrimination, clawing his way up from nothing to build a successful real estate empire. Growing up, Nia had witnessed her father's struggles and triumphs, and his resilience had always inspired her. But sitting there, the sting of Margot's words still fresh, she couldn't help but wonder if she had handled the situation as he would have. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her father, just landed. "We'll be at the hotel in 30. Excited to see you, kiddo." A small smile tugged at her lips. Elliot always had a way of making her feel like everything would be okay. She replied quickly, then leaned back, trying to compose herself before the gala. Meanwhile, back at the reception desk, Margot was fuming. She watched as Luis returned from helping another guest, his calm demeanor only fueling her irritation. "This is your fault," she hissed under her breath. Luis raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "You undermined me in front of a guest," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how unprofessional that makes me look?" "I think your own actions took care of that," Luis replied evenly. "You treated her unfairly, and you know it." Margot's cheeks flushed. "You don't understand the pressures of this job. We have a reputation to maintain, and sometimes that means making tough calls." "Tough calls?" Luis's voice was incredulous. "Or personal biases?" Before Margot could respond, Reynolds appeared again, his expression serious. "Margot, my office. Now." The receptionist paled, her bravado crumbling as she followed him. Luis watched them go, a small sense of satisfaction blooming in his chest. As Nia waited in the lounge, her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a young woman carrying a tray with a glass of water and a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. "Ms. Collins, I'm Ava," she said with a warm smile. "I'll be assisting you while you're here. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Ava," Nia replied, grateful for the gesture. Ava hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. Finally, she leaned in slightly. "I heard what happened at the desk. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry. That shouldn't have happened." Nia looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's not just you," Ava continued. "We've had other guests, treated poorly. But you're the first to speak up about it." Nia's curiosity was piqued. "What do you mean?" Ava glanced around, lowering her voice. "Some of the staff, well, certain people, think they can get away with treating guests differently based on appearances. But things might be changing soon." "Why's that?" Ava hesitated, then smiled cryptically. "You'll see." Before Nia could press further, the door to the lounge opened, and in walked her father. Elliot Collins was a commanding presence, his tailored suit fitting perfectly, his stride exuding confidence. His face lit up when he saw Nia, and she couldn't help but smile back. "Dad," she exclaimed, standing to greet him. "Nia," he said warmly, pulling her into a hug. "You look incredible. Ready for tonight?" "I think so," she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Elliot picked up on it immediately. "What's wrong?" Nia hesitated, debating how much to tell him. But as she looked into her father's eyes, she decided he needed to know. She recounted the events at the reception desk, her voice steady but laced with frustration. Elliot listened intently, his expression darkening with every detail. By the time she finished, his jaw was set, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and determination. "This isn't just about you, Nia," he said finally. "This is about every person who's been made to feel like they don't belong. And it ends now." Nia's heart swelled with pride, but she also felt a pang of worry. She knew her father well enough to know that he wasn't one to let things slide. As they prepared to leave the lounge for the gala, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. What she didn't know was just how monumental it would be, not just for her, but for everyone involved. Elliot's calm exterior belied the storm brewing within him as he escorted Nia out of the lounge. They walked through the grand lobby of the hotel, its polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers an ironic backdrop for the turmoil of emotions simmering beneath the surface. Nia clutched her father's arm, finding solace in his steady presence, but her mind was a whirlwind of doubts and anticipation. As they approached the grand ballroom, the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses spilled into the corridor. The gala was in full swing, with impeccably dressed guests mingling beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. Servers moved gracefully through the crowd, offering trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and a live jazz band provided an elegant soundtrack to the evening. Nia's nerves were beginning to settle when she felt her father's pace slow. She followed his gaze and saw a familiar figure near the entrance to the ballroom, Margot. The receptionist stood rigid, her face a mask of thinly veiled discomfort as she recognized Elliot. Her gaze flickered to Nia, then quickly darted away. Elliot leaned in toward Nia, his voice low and calm. "Is that the woman who treated you poorly?" Nia nodded, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what her father had planned, but she knew he wouldn't let this go unnoticed. Without another word, Elliot guided her toward the ballroom. As they stepped inside, conversations paused, and heads turned. Elliot's presence commanded attention, his reputation preceding him in this crowd of affluent and influential attendees. They made their way toward a small stage at the far end of the room, where a microphone stood waiting. Nia noticed that the band had stopped playing, their instruments resting in the quiet anticipation that seemed to ripple through the room. Elliot stepped up onto the stage, his imposing figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the overhead lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elliot began, his voice smooth and powerful, "thank you for gathering here tonight to support such an important cause." Polite applause followed his words, but it quickly died down as he continued. "Before we proceed, I feel compelled to share a personal experience that highlights why events like this matter so deeply. It's a story about my daughter, Nia, who has faced something tonight that no one should ever have to endure." Nia felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she forced herself to stand tall. "My daughter arrived here earlier this evening, excited to celebrate and support this gala. Instead, she was met with prejudice and disrespect, treated as though she did not belong simply because of the way she looks." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces registered shock, others discomfort, and still others indignation. Margot, standing near the edge of the room, looked as though she wished the floor would swallow her whole. "Elliot's G. Nia," he said quietly, "stay close to me." They made their way toward a small stage at the far end of the room, where a microphone stood waiting. Nia noticed that the band had stopped playing, their instruments resting in the quiet anticipation that seemed to ripple through the room. Elliot stepped up onto the stage, his imposing figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the overhead lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elliot began, his voice smooth and powerful, "thank you for gathering here tonight to support such an important cause." Polite applause followed his words, but it quickly died down as he continued. "Before we proceed, I feel compelled to share a personal experience that highlights why events like this matter so deeply. It's a story about my daughter, Nia, who has faced something tonight that no one should ever have to endure." Nia felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she forced herself to stand tall. "My daughter arrived here earlier this evening, excited to celebrate and support this gala. Instead, she was met with prejudice and disrespect, treated as though she did not belong simply because of the way she looks." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces registered shock, others discomfort, and still others indignation. Margot, standing near the edge of the room, looked as though she wished the floor would swallow her whole. Elliot's gaze swept over the crowd, his expression unflinching. As the new owner of this establishment, I am appalled that such behavior persists in a place meant to welcome all. Let me make one thing abundantly clear: this hotel will stand as a beacon of inclusivity, respect, and dignity for every guest who walks through its doors. Gasps rippled through the room at his declaration. Margot's face drained of color, and Nia could see the dawning realization in her eyes. She hadn't just insulted a guest, she had insulted the owner's daughter. I will personally ensure that the staff are retrained to reflect the values this hotel must uphold, Elliot continued, his voice unwavering. And to those who cannot align themselves with those values, there will be no place for you here. The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation erupting as Elliot stepped down from the stage. Nia felt a swell of pride and gratitude, though her heart ached for the vulnerability of the moment. As Elliot returned to her side, she whispered, "Dad, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied firmly. "Because staying silent lets the problem continue." The rest of the evening unfolded in a blur for Nia. Guests approached her and Elliot, offering words of support and admiration. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination, while others pledged to stand against it in their circles of influence. Meanwhile, Margot remained rooted to her spot near the entrance, her expression a mixture of anger and humiliation. Luis approached her quietly, his tone gentle but firm. "Maybe it's time to reflect, Margot. This could be a turning point if you let it." She said nothing, her lips pressed tightly together. As the gala wound down, Nia and Elliot sat together in a quiet corner of the ballroom. "I'm proud of you," Elliot said, his voice soft. "You handled tonight with grace and strength." "Thanks, Dad," Nia replied. "But it's not over. This is just the beginning." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. And what a beginning it is. Neither of them knew then how far-reaching the impact of this night would be, not just for the hotel, but for the community at large. Conversations sparked at the gala would lead to larger discussions about bias, privilege, and the importance of standing up for what is right. And for Nia, it marked the start of a journey she hadn't anticipated, a journey that would challenge her, change her, and ultimately define her in ways she had never imagined. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of Nia's suite, casting a golden glow over the plush furnishings. She stretched, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't expected after the intensity of the previous night. Yet, there was still an unease in her chest, a lingering weight from the events that had unfolded. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Luis standing there, a folder in his hands and an apologetic smile on his face. "Good morning, Miss Collins," he said politely. "I hope I'm not intruding. Mr. Collins asked me to deliver some documents to you and to extend his gratitude once again for your patience last night." "Of course. Thank you, Luis," she replied, taking the folder. She paused, studying him for a moment. "You were one of the few people who stood up for me yesterday. That meant a lot." Luis's face softened. "It was the right thing to do. I've seen too much go unchecked here, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. But to be honest, you speaking out gave me the courage to act." Nia nodded, appreciating his candor. "It shouldn't be like this, though. No one should have to fight to be treated with basic respect." "You're absolutely right," Luis agreed. "That's why I think your father's decision to step in as the new owner is going to change everything. This place needs it." As he left, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that Luis's words were more than just encouragement, they were a call to action. She opened the folder and found an itinerary for the day's meetings and a note from her father. "Nia, we have a long day ahead. Change is coming, and I want you to be part of it. Meet me in the conference room at 10 a.m. Love, Dad." Her heart swelled with pride. Elliot Collins wasn't just a businessman, he was a force for good, and he wanted her by his side as they tackled the challenges ahead. When she arrived at the conference room, she found her father seated at the head of a long table, surrounded by the hotel's department heads and key staff members. Their expressions ranged from cautious optimism to outright skepticism. "Good morning, everyone," Elliot began, his tone commanding yet approachable. "Thank you for being here. As you know, last night was a turning point, not just for this hotel, but for all of us. It highlighted issues that cannot be ignored." He gestured for Nia to sit beside him, a move that didn't go unnoticed by the staff. "My daughter, Nia, experienced something no guest should ever face. It's not enough to apologize, we need to take meaningful action to ensure this never happens again." He turned to Margot, who sat stiffly near the end of the table. "Margot, I know you've been with this hotel for many years, and I value your experience. But the behavior you displayed last night is unacceptable. This isn't just about one incident, it's about a culture that has been allowed to persist unchecked." Margot's face turned crimson, but she said nothing. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. "To move forward, we're implementing mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all staff," Elliot continued. "This isn't a punishment, it's an opportunity for growth. We're also establishing a guest advocacy team to handle concerns promptly and fairly." One of the managers raised a hand. "Mr. Collins, these changes sound promising, but how do we ensure they stick? Policies are only as strong as their enforcement." "Excellent question," Elliot said. "That's why we're creating a system of accountability. There will be regular evaluations, and staff members who go above and beyond to uphold our values will be rewarded. Those who cannot align with these principles will be let go." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Nia noticed the mix of emotions on the faces around the table: relief, determination, and, in some cases, resentment. After the meeting, Nia and Elliot lingered in the conference room. "Dad, do you really think this will work?" she asked. "It's a start," he replied. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but we have to take the first step. And I need you to be part of it, Nia. Your perspective, your strength, people need to see that this isn't just about me or the business. It's about making things right for everyone." As the day went on, Nia found herself drawn into the whirlwind of activity. She joined her father in meeting with various teams, listening to their concerns and ideas for improvement. She realized how deeply ingrained some of the issues were, not just in policies but in attitudes. One interaction stood out to her. A housekeeping supervisor named Clara approached her during a break, her expression tentative but hopeful. "Ms. Collins, I just wanted to thank you for speaking out. I've been here for 10 years, and I've seen things I didn't have the courage to confront. But seeing you stand up, it's inspired me." Nia felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Clara. It means a lot to hear that. But this isn't just about me. We all need to stand together to make this place better." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city, Nia and Elliot sat together on the terrace of the hotel's rooftop restaurant. The view was breathtaking, but Nia's thoughts were elsewhere. "Dad, do you think people can really change?" she asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Elliot considered her question carefully. "I think people can change if they want to. But it takes more than just good intentions, it takes effort, humility, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths." Nia nodded, his words resonating deeply. She thought about Margot, about Luis, about Clara. She thought about herself and how this experience had already begun to reshape her understanding of strength and resilience. As they sat in companionable silence, the faint hum of the city below blending with the soft rustle of the evening breeze, Nia felt a spark of hope. Change was hard, but it was possible. And together, she and her father were determined to make it happen, not just for the hotel, but for everyone who walked through its doors. Unbeknownst to them, the ripple effects of their actions were already spreading beyond the walls of the hotel. Conversations were happening, minds were opening, and a community was beginning to see that standing up for what's right could lead to something extraordinary. The following morning, the energy at the hotel felt different, charged, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. Nia awoke early, driven by a strange mixture of determination and apprehension. The previous day had been emotionally exhausting, yet it left her with a profound sense of purpose. Change was on the horizon, but it was clear that not everyone would embrace it willingly. After a quick breakfast, Nia joined her father in his private office. Elliot was on a call, his tone calm but firm as he addressed one of the hotel's long-standing corporate clients who had expressed concerns about the new policies. Nia admired how he handled the situation, balancing professionalism with an unwavering commitment to his values. When he finally hung up, he turned to her with a small smile. "Ready for another day of making waves?" he asked. Nia smiled back, though she felt the weight of the task ahead. "Always." Their first order of business was meeting with the newly formed guest advocacy team. Comprising staff members from various departments, the group was tasked with ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and respected. Nia recognized Clara among them, her face lit with cautious optimism. Elliot began the meeting with a brief introduction, then handed the floor to Nia. "This initiative is as much about listening as it is about action," he said. "And I think Nia has a unique perspective to share." Nia hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. "Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know change can be uncomfortable, and it's easy to feel like one voice doesn't matter. But I want you to know that every small step we take makes a difference. Together, we can create an environment where everyone, guests and staff alike, feels valued." Her words were met with nods of agreement, though she could see some skepticism lingering in a few faces. The meeting ended with a commitment to hold weekly discussions, ensuring that the team had a consistent platform to address issues and share progress. As the day progressed, Nia found herself drawn into a particularly challenging situation. A prominent guest, Mr. Rutherford, had lodged a complaint about a staff member, claiming that his requests had been ignored. When Nia and Elliot reviewed the details, however, it became clear that Rutherford's complaint was rooted in entitlement rather than any legitimate grievance. Elliot sighed as he closed the file. "This is one of those moments where doing the right thing might cost us," he said. "What do you mean?" Nia asked. "Rutherford is a major investor," Elliot explained. "He expects preferential treatment, and in the past, he's gotten it. But if we're serious about creating a culture of respect, we can't let him undermine that." Nia nodded, understanding the dilemma. "Then we stand firm. If we cave now, it sets the wrong precedent." Later that afternoon, Elliot called a meeting with Rutherford in the hotel's executive lounge. Nia joined him, determined to support her father's stance. Rutherford arrived, his presence as overbearing as his reputation. He wasted no time launching into a tirade about how he'd been disrespected by the staff. Elliot listened patiently, his expression neutral. When Rutherford finally paused, Elliot spoke. "I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Rutherford. However, after reviewing the situation, it's clear that the staff member in question acted within the hotel's guidelines. We strive to treat all our guests equally, and that's a standard we cannot compromise." Rutherford's face reddened. "Are you seriously telling me that I, one of your biggest investors, don't deserve special treatment?" Nia stepped in, her voice steady but firm. "Mr. Rutherford, this hotel's success depends not just on its investors but on the trust and loyalty of every guest who walks through its doors. If we make exceptions for some, we fail everyone else." Rutherford glared at her, then turned back to Elliot. "You'll regret this," he said coldly before storming out. The tension in the room was palpable, but Elliot turned to Nia with a proud smile. "You handled that perfectly," he said. As the day wound down, Nia found herself reflecting on the past 48 hours. She thought about the courage it had taken to confront Margot, the resolve needed to implement change, and the importance of standing up to figures like Rutherford. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply fulfilling. That evening, Nia and Elliot attended a staff town hall, an open forum where employees could voice their concerns and share ideas. The room buzzed with energy, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. One of the first to speak was Luis. "I've been here for 5 years, and I'll be honest, I never thought I'd see this day," he said. "But seeing the changes over the past 2 days gives me hope. It won't be easy, but I believe we can make this hotel a place we're all proud of." Clara followed, her voice trembling slightly. "I've worked in housekeeping for a decade, and I've seen too many colleagues leave because they didn't feel respected. But now, I feel like we're finally being heard. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Thank you, Nia." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Nia felt a lump rise in her throat. This was more than just a job for these people, it was their livelihood, their pride, their community. As the meeting ended, Nia and Elliot stayed behind to chat with staff members who lingered. One of them was Margot. She approached hesitantly, her demeanor far less confident than it had been days ago. "Mr. Collins, Nia," she began, her voice unsteady. "I owe you both an apology. My behavior was inexcusable, and I see that now. I want to do better, if you'll let me." Elliot studied her for a moment before nodding. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, Margot. The question is, are you willing to put in the work to make things right?" "I am," she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. Nia offered her a small smile. "Then let's move forward. Together." As Margot walked away, Nia turned to her father. "Do you think she means it?" "I think she's starting to," Elliot replied. "And that's a good place to begin." That night, as Nia sat on the balcony of her suite, looking out over the city's twinkling lights, she felt a deep sense of purpose. This journey wasn't just about fixing a hotel, it was about creating a legacy of respect, integrity, and unity. And as challenging as it was, she knew it was a journey worth taking. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as the hotel's transformation unfolded. Word about the incident with Nia and her father had spread beyond the hotel walls, sparking conversations across the city. Guests, staff, and even locals who had never stayed at the hotel were suddenly paying attention. For Nia, every day presented new challenges, but it also brought new opportunities to create something lasting and meaningful. Elliot had made it clear that the changes wouldn't stop at the surface. Policies were rewritten to ensure transparency and fairness, mandatory sensitivity training sessions were held, and the newly formed guest advocacy team began tackling systemic issues head-on. Nia became an integral part of this effort, often finding herself in meetings, brainstorming sessions, and on the ground, connecting with employees. One morning, Nia walked into the lobby and noticed something that brought an involuntary smile to her face. Clara, who once kept her head down to avoid confrontation, was confidently directing a group of new employees, her voice steady and authoritative. Luis, who had been hesitant to speak up at first, was giving a small tour to a group of international guests, his easy humor and warmth evident in their laughter. The lobby itself had also changed. The impersonal, sterile atmosphere had been replaced with vibrant artwork from local artists, cozy seating arrangements that encouraged conversation, and a new welcome desk where guests were greeted with a smile and a complimentary drink. It was more than just a facelift, it was a reflection of the hotel's evolving spirit. But not everyone embraced the changes. Margot had been allowed to keep her position after her heartfelt apology, but she struggled with her new role. Though she no longer displayed outright hostility, her discomfort with the hotel's direction was palpable. Nia often found her lingering in the background, watching but not fully engaging. One afternoon, Nia approached Margot in the staff lounge. "Hey, Margot," she said, keeping her tone friendly. "How are you holding up?" Margot hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Nia's openness. "I'm adjusting," she said after a moment. It's a lot to take in. It is, Nia agreed, nodding. Change is hard, especially when it feels like everything you've known is being turned upside down. But you're still here, and that says a lot. Margot looked down at her hands. I don't know if I belong here anymore. I've spent so many years doing things one way, and now I'm not sure I fit into this new version of the hotel. You do, Nia said firmly. But fitting in doesn't mean staying the same. It means growing with the change. If you're willing to try, I think you'll find that you have a lot to offer. Margot didn't reply immediately, but Nia saw the flicker of something in her expression, hope, maybe, or the beginning of resolve. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. Meanwhile, the hotel continued to attract attention, and not all of it was positive. News outlets picked up on the story of Elliot's stand against Rutherford, framing it as a David and Goliath battle that challenged the status quo. While many applauded Elliot's courage, others criticized him for jeopardizing relationships with powerful investors. Social media buzzed with opinions, some praising the hotel's commitment to inclusivity, while others accused it of pandering. Amid the noise, a surprising email landed in Elliot's inbox. It was from Rutherford himself, requesting another meeting. Elliot debated whether to accept, but Nia encouraged him to hear the man out. Maybe he's had a change of heart, she suggested. When Rutherford arrived, his demeanor was noticeably subdued. Gone was the bluster and entitlement that had marked their previous encounter. He sat across from Elliot and Nia, his posture uncharacteristically humble. I'll be honest, Rutherford began, I didn't expect the backlash I received after our last meeting. It made me take a hard look at myself and the way I've been operating. I've realized that the world is changing, and if I want to stay relevant, I need to change too. Elliot listened carefully, his expression unreadable. What are you proposing? I want to invest in the hotel's new vision, Rutherford said. I was wrong to resist it before, and I want to make amends. If you'll have me, I'd like to be part of this transformation. Nia felt a surge of disbelief but also cautious optimism. She glanced at her father, who appeared to be weighing the offer carefully. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Rutherford, Elliot said finally. If you're serious about supporting this vision, there are ways to prove it. Rutherford nodded. Tell me what you need. Over the next few days, Rutherford's actions spoke volumes. He not only reaffirmed his financial commitment to the hotel but also used his influence to bring in other investors who shared the hotel's values. His involvement sent a powerful message, that change was not only possible but also profitable. As the months passed, the hotel blossomed into a beacon of inclusivity and excellence. It became known as more than just a place to stay, it was a symbol of what could be achieved when people dared to challenge the status quo. Guests from all walks of life felt welcomed, and employees found new pride in their work. Nia, too, underwent her own transformation. What had started as a chance visit to her father's hotel had turned into a life-changing journey. She discovered a strength and purpose she hadn't known she possessed, and she knew she wanted to continue making a difference, at the hotel and beyond. One evening, as Nia and Elliot stood in the lobby, watching guests and staff interact with a newfound sense of connection, Elliot turned to her. I couldn't have done this without you, he said. You could have, Nia replied with a smile. But I'm glad I was here to help. They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the bustling scene around them. It was a far cry from the cold, impersonal space it had been when Nia first arrived. The hotel was alive, a reflection of the values they had fought to uphold. As Nia prepared to leave for the night, she spotted Margot at the front desk, assisting a guest with genuine warmth. It was a small but significant victory, one that made Nia believe that true change was not only possible but also contagious. The journey wasn't over, there would always be challenges, setbacks, and resistance. But Nia knew that they had built a foundation strong enough to withstand them. And as she stepped out into the crisp evening air, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope for what lay ahead.